Class 11, The Address, Lesson number 2, Snapshots Textbook, Literature Section, English Core Course.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Shalini English classes. This is Shalini Sharma, your English teacher. Hope you all are doing well and learning English through my YouTube channel.
In this video, I will be explaining all the important aspects related to story The Address, which is lesson number 2 of Snapshots Textbook of Class 11.
But before I initiate my topic, I would like to request all of you to like, share and subscribe my YouTube channel, that is Shalini English classes, and don't forget to hit the bell icon. The reason is that you will be getting notifications and updates for my new uploads. So students, please like, share and subscribe my YouTube channel.
Let's start with the introduction of the story The Address. So this story is set against the backdrop of World War II. It is a moving story of a daughter who goes in search of her mother's belongings after the war. She does find them, but suddenly has no desire to get them back. She leaves them behind because she doesn't want to remember the days that have gone, a life which can never be the same again. So she wants to move on. Here you will come to know about the author of the lesson The Address, and the author is Marga Minko. Marga Minko is a Dutch journalist and writer, and actually her real surname was Menko, but an official accidentally switched the first vowel. Here you can understand the theme of the lesson The Address. So this story is based on the themes of ill effects of war, destruction of humanity, nostalgia, and killing of the feelings of love and sympathy. Here you can understand the explanation of content of the lesson The Address. So we got to know that this is a moving story of a daughter who goes in search of her mother's belongings after the war in Holland. Okay, the narrator went to number 46 Marconi Street to see Mrs. Dorling, who was an old acquaintance of her mother, Mrs. S., and Mrs. Dorling had removed almost all the belongings of her mother during the war to this place. Now all this was done with Mrs. S' silent consent, as Mrs. Dorling wanted to save her things which they would lose if they had to leave the place. So, narrator visited the place, the address 46 Marconi Street. She remembered Mrs. Dorling clearly. She was a woman with a broad back. Mrs. Dorling looked at the narrator searchingly and showed no sign of recognition. She kept staring her in silence. She saw that the narrator, who had recognized her mother's green knitted cardigan, was looking at it. Here we get to know that Mrs. Dorling half hid herself behind the door and refused to see the narrator. She did not let her enter her house. Mrs. Dorling was surprised to see the narrator, who had survived from the war. Now, after that, narrator had no other option. She returned to the station and boarded the train. While in train, she remembered the first time she had seen Mrs. Dorling and how her mother had introduced her to her old acquaintance and given the address. Here we get to know that the narrator is remembering her past, and she was informed by her mother that all the priceless things of the house have been taken away by Mrs. Dorling, as Mrs. Dorling had assured mother of narrator that she would return all the things back when the war will be over. Here we get to know that narrator had seen Mrs. Dorling for the first time during the first half of the war. She had come home for a few days and noticed the change in the room. She missed various things and her mother informed her that Mrs. Dorling had moved these things to safety and gave her the address 46 Marconi Street. Here we get to know that after the liberation of her country, the narrator lost interest in all the things which were taken away by Mrs. Dorling from the mother. Now many of them were hidden away in cupboards and boxes, but day by day everything was becoming normal again. The narrator started missing the things taken away by Mrs. Dorling. She wanted to see them, touch them and remember them. So she thought to make a second visit to the house of Mrs. Dorling. Here we get to know that after the first fruitless visit to Mrs. Dorling's house, the narrator visited the place a second time. Now this time a girl of about 15 opened the door to her. She asked the girl if her mother was at home. Since Mrs. Dorling was away, the narrator decided to wait for her. So she followed the girl along the passage. Now the first thing that struck her was an old-fashioned iron Hanukkah candle holder hung next to the mirror. Then they went into the living room and the narrator was horrified as she was in a room she knew and did not know. She found herself in the midst of things she had so wanted to see again, touch again, but which oppressed her in the strange atmosphere. The tasteless way of arrangement, ugly furniture and the muggy smell all contributed to arouse this feeling. She did not have the courage to look around her. She sat down and stared at the woolen tablecloth. As she followed the lines of the pattern, she remembered that it was their tablecloth which had a burn mark that had never been repaired. Soon she found the hole. Here we get to know that the girl of Mrs. Dorling poured narrator tea from a white pot which had a gold border on the lid. She opened the box and took out some spoons. The narrator praised the box and Mrs. Dorling's daughter said that it was an antique. And they had got lots more and she pointed round the room. Here we get to know that when the daughter of Mrs. Dorling was praising the things in her home, the narrator knew very well which things she meant. She remarked that the cutlery, spoons, forks and knives was silver. The girl laughed. She walked to the sideboard and wanted to open a drawer. But narrator suddenly got up and decided to go out of the house. She did not want to wait for Mrs. Dorling. This is the last paragraph of the lesson, the address. So here we get to know that the objects linked with the mother of narrator aroused memories of her former life. At first she was eager to see them, to touch them, but now they had lost their value since they were stored in some strange surroundings. Moreover, they were useless to her in her present condition. She lived in a small rented room with space for no more than a handful of cutlery fitted in the narrow table drawer. So, the narrator decided to forget the address. She wanted to leave the memories of her mother and the war behind her and decided to move on. So here we are done with the explanation of the content of the lesson, the address. I hope you must have understood it. Here you will come to know about the value points of the lesson, the address. So we come to know that the narrator goes in search of her mother's belongings after the war in Holland. The mother of narrator, Mrs. S, had left all her costly things with a woman known to her. After some time, the mother died and narrator came back to Holland to see, touch and remember the things taken away by that woman. The narrator reaches the address house number 46 Marconi Street and finds the objects in the house of Mrs. Dorling. Now Mrs. Dorling knowingly refused to recognize narrator and she did not let her enter the house. Here value points are continued for the lesson, the address. So after her first visit to Mrs. Dorling's house, the narrator decided to try a second time. Now this time a girl of 15 years opened the door and Mrs. Dorling was not at home that time. The narrator decided to wait for Mrs. Dorling. Now she found herself in the midst of all her familiar things. She felt oppressed because all the things were arranged in a tasteless manner and ill-maintained. The narrator decided to leave house and didn't wait for Mrs. Dorling after that. She again looked up at the nameplate. The address was correct, but the objects associated with former times lost their value for her. She felt that she had no use for those things in her small rented room, and she decided that she should forget the address, and it was the easiest thing to do to be at peace. So these are the value points of the lesson, the address. I hope you must have understood the value points. Here you will come to know about the title justification for the lesson, the address. So yes, the title, the address is apt as the whole story revolves around the address of Mrs. Dorling, about which mother of narrator had told before dying, whom she trusted blindly, and gave Mrs. Dorling all her priceless possessions with a promise to return them after the war was over. Now it was the address 46 Marconi Street that the narrator looked for to retrieve her mother's belongings. After her second visit, the narrator lost her interest in the things and decided to forget the same address. So yes, we can say that the title is quite convincing and appropriate. Here you can understand the character sketch of the narrator of the lesson, the address. So the narrator is an intelligent and devoted daughter. She loves and respects her mother but doesn't approve of her soft behavior towards Mrs. Dorling. Now the narrator has a keen power of observation. She is a realist who doesn't like to remain attached to the past. Her resolution to forget the address and move on shows her brave nature. And yes, she has a progressive personality. So I hope these points related to character sketch of narrator must be. Here you can find the vocabulary which has been used in the lesson, the address. For understanding the content of lesson, it will be helpful for you if you learn this vocabulary wholeheartedly. Now this is assignment number 1 for the lesson, the address. And you all are supposed to do this assignment 1 in your fair notebooks in legible handwriting. Now here you can find assignment number 2 for the lesson, the address. And you have to do this assignment 2 also in your fair notebooks in legible handwriting. I have attached both assignment 1 and 2 with the description box of this video also. In the end, I would like to inform all of you that in this video, I have explained all the important aspects related to lesson, the address, which is lesson number 2 of Snapshots Textbook, and it includes introduction about the author, theme, explanation of content, value points, title, character sketch, and vocabulary. I hope you will like the video and understand the lesson clearly. So students, keep watching English videos and learn English through my YouTube channel.
So that's all from my side for today's topic. Hope you must have understood the concept clearly. Once again a reminder, students, please like, share and subscribe my YouTube channel, that is Shalini English Classes by your teacher Shalini Sharma. Thanks for watching this video. Take very good care of yourselves. Stay safe.